Have you ever paused and wondered what truly leaves a lasting mark in the heart of someone you love? Not wealth, not charm, but something quieter, deeper, something many men overlook. In today's story, we journey to a peaceful village where a 72-year-old woman, graceful, wise, and quietly powerful, shares the kind of truth that doesn't shout, but lingers in your soul long after it's spoken. Through her gentle voice and lived experience, she reveals a different way to understand intimacy, one rooted not in performance, but in presence. But this isn't just a lesson about love between two people. It's about how small, heartfelt actions can ripple outward, healing wounds, restoring respect, and strengthening the very fabric of a family or community. If any part of you longs to connect more deeply, to love more meaningfully, or to simply feel seen in this stage of life, then stay with us. The story ahead may just hold a piece of wisdom your heart has been quietly waiting for. And if it speaks to you, I invite you to subscribe or simply stay a while. This space is here for you. Number 1, the wisdom we didn't know we needed. In a quiet village tucked between soft hills and winding paths, there lived a woman whose presence seemed to still the noise of the world. Her name was Grace Thompson. At 72, Grace had become more than just a familiar face in the neighborhood. She was someone people turned to when life grew heavy and answers felt far away. Her white hair framed her face like silver thread, but her voice was warm and steady, never rushed, never loud. There was something in the way she looked at you, as if she saw beyond the surface, as if she understood something you hadn't yet said aloud. Grace's home stood at the edge of town, modest and quiet, with ivy curling up its stone walls and the scent of lavender always lingering in the air. People often said that stepping inside her home felt like stepping into a memory, one you didn't know you'd missed until it wrapped its arms around you. The kitchen smelled of cedar wood and tea leaves, and the old oak table in the center had held more stories than most people carry in a lifetime. One crisp afternoon in early fall, a group of visitors gathered around that very table. Some were younger, some older. Some carried questions. Others only carried silence. But all of them were drawn to Grace for the same reason. They were searching for something no book could quite teach. Not facts, not instructions, but something deeper. Perhaps clarity, perhaps peace, perhaps just a reminder that they were not alone in what they were feeling. Grace listened, always, before she spoke, and when she did speak, it was never to instruct or impress. Her words came slowly, like leaves falling on water, settling quietly into the hearts of those around her. She spoke of the years that had shaped her, not just the big moments, but the soft ones. Morning walks with her late husband, evenings spent stitching beside the fireplace, the first winter she spent alone after he passed. She didn't offer cliches or polished advice. She simply shared what time had taught her, that strength isn't loud and wisdom doesn't always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from knowing which questions are worth holding on to. Among those listening was a man named Robert in his early 60s. He had recently retired and was still figuring out what that meant. The days were quieter now, but not in the peaceful way he'd imagined. Instead, he found himself restless, unsure of what his place was now that his schedule no longer defined him. With hesitation, he asked Grace something he'd never asked aloud before. "Do you think it's too late to change what matters to me?" Grace looked at him, not with surprise, but with recognition. "No, Robert," she said gently, "it's not too late. It's never too late to live more honestly, to slow down, to shift the weight of your life from what you're supposed to be doing to what actually feeds your soul." She told him about her husband Harold, who had spent years feeling like he had to keep being useful even after retirement. It wasn't until he gave himself permission to simply be, to fix radios in the garage, to nap in the afternoons, to watch birds with no purpose but joy, that he began to feel whole again. "It's not about doing less," Grace said. "It's about doing what matters more quietly." The room fell into a thoughtful silence, and it was in that silence that the real teaching happened. Not through instruction, but through the soft shift in how each person began to see themselves. Not as people winding down, but as people turning inward, turning toward a slower, truer way of living. As the fire crackled gently behind her, Grace reminded everyone that there is no deadline on becoming who you are meant to be. The world may not ask for your stories anymore, but that doesn't mean they aren't worth telling. Your peace is not a luxury. It's your right. You've earned it. When the time came to leave, no one rushed to stand. It was as if stepping away from that moment meant stepping back into the noise. But one by one, they rose with softer shoulders and steadier eyes. Robert lingered a moment longer. "Thank you," he said simply. Grace nodded as if to say, "You already had the answer. You just needed someone to say it out loud first. If you're still here, reading this, then maybe something in Grace's story spoke to something quiet inside you too. And if it did, I'd love to know. Just write 'I'm still here' in the comments." Sometimes even that small act can remind you and others that none of us are walking this season alone. Because even now, even at 72 or 82, your story is still unfolding. And maybe, just maybe, the most beautiful chapters are still to come. Number 2, the sacred act of intimacy. There was a gentle stillness in the room when the young man finally found the courage to speak. "May I ask something personal?" he said, his voice low but steady. "What does oral intimacy truly mean, beyond what people usually talk about?" Some of the others shifted in their seats, unsure of how such a question would be received. But Margaret, 72 years old, calm and quietly radiant, met the moment with grace. She offered a soft smile, folded her hands on the table, and leaned forward slightly. "I'm glad you asked," she said, her voice carrying a warmth that instantly settled the unease. "It's not an easy topic, but it's an important one. And I'll tell you what I know, not from theory, but from a life well lived." She let a pause fill the air before continuing, her words tender and thoughtful. "You see, what you're asking about is often misunderstood today. It's too often reduced to something physical, something quick, even transactional. But in truth, it can be so much more. At its deepest level, it's not about performance or desire, it's about reverence." The group leaned in, drawn by something deeper than curiosity now. Margaret began to share a story passed down through her family, one rooted in the quiet teachings of generations before her. In her grandmother's time, such acts of intimacy were never spoken of openly, yet they were held with quiet sacredness. They believed that the truest connection between partners didn't come from spectacle, but from trust, from small moments when one soul met another with complete presence. For a man to engage in that kind of intimacy, she explained gently, was to offer a kind of worship, not of the body alone, but of the heart, the spirit. It was a way of saying, without words, "I see you, I honor you, I cherish you." And when done with love and respect, it became an act of profound healing for both people involved. She paused again, eyes shimmering as if remembering something distant, something precious. The men who understood this were seen differently, not just as partners, but as protectors of the emotional bond, as men who valued connection above control. They didn't act to impress, they acted to care. The room had grown completely still. No one looked away. There was no embarrassment, only reverence, the same reverence with which Margaret had spoken. And in that moment, a truth settled over them. That intimacy, when approached with humility and devotion, becomes something that touches far beyond the physical. It becomes a way of healing, of honoring, of deepening love in ways words can never quite express. She closed her thoughts softly. True intimacy is a gift. It's not about taking, it's about offering. A gesture that says, "You are worthy of tenderness. You are worthy of being seen without fear." When a man understands that, truly understands it, he becomes something more than a lover. He becomes a safe place, a soul that holds, not demands. As the evening wore on, the group left Margaret's home quietly, carrying not just knowledge, but something far more precious. A sense of understanding that would linger long after the night faded. And as she sat by the fire, alone once more, Margaret felt at peace, because she knew that her words, soft as they were, had taken root in hearts ready to carry them forward. Number 3, a village seeks elder wisdom. As the sun dipped behind the hills, surrendering the sky to the quiet embrace of twilight, something in the village began to shift. The air grew still, almost reverent, as a cool mist curled along the cobbled paths. It was the kind of evening that wrapped itself around you gently, whispering of stories waiting to be told. And inside one humble cottage, a group of young villagers sat in hushed anticipation, their hearts stirred by something they couldn't yet name. It had started as a simple conversation, an afternoon visit to Miss Eleanor, the 72-year-old widow whose quiet life had long been the backbone of their small community. But the moment she spoke, her voice calm and textured with time, something in the room shifted. The questions they brought, about love, about respect, about the deeper meanings of togetherness, were met not with answers, but with something far more powerful: reflection. Miss Eleanor told them a story from her younger days, one not about grand romance or dramatic gestures, but about the quiet respect between her and her late husband, Samuel. She shared how every morning without fail, he would sit beside her while she brushed her hair. He never rushed her, never spoke during that ritual. He simply sat, present and content. That, she said, was his way of saying, "I see you." It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, but it was sacred. The room had fallen into deep stillness as her words sank in, not just into their minds, but into something more intimate, their sense of what love could be. What began as curiosity became longing, not just for answers, but for meaning, for understanding, for the kind of wisdom that only years and quiet mornings like those could teach. Energized by that yearning, the young people left Miss Eleanor's home and moved through the misty streets, drawn toward another light glowing softly in the distance. They came to the small house of Thomas, one of the oldest and most respected men in the village, a retired carpenter with hands calloused by a lifetime of work and a voice as steady as the beams he used to carve. He was the kind of man who didn't speak often, but when he did, people leaned in. The group was quiet as they approached. They didn't knock right away. Something about the stillness made them hesitate, as if interrupting might break a sacred rhythm. But when Thomas opened the door, he smiled in that slow, knowing way of his and said simply, "I was wondering when you'd come." Inside, his home was lit by the soft glow of firelight, casting warm shadows on shelves filled with old books, wooden figurines, and framed photographs of people long gone but never forgotten. The young ones settled onto the floor, eager, a little nervous. Thomas didn't speak immediately. He sat beside the fire, gazing into it as if gathering not thoughts, but memories. And when he did begin to speak, his words were slow, deliberate, and beautifully spare. He didn't lecture. He remembered. He spoke of his wife, Miriam, and how she used to hum when she cooked, how for years he never noticed it, until the day the house fell silent after she passed. "You realize then," he said, eyes glinting, "that love isn't always what you say, it's what you notice." His voice lingered in the room like incense, and no one dared interrupt. He told them how, in his later years, he had come to see respect not just as a rule, but as a rhythm, something you grow into like your favorite chair. "The body slows down," he said, "but the heart learns to listen better." That night they stayed longer than they planned. Not because of what Thomas said, but because of how it made them feel. Grounded, seen, connected to something bigger than themselves. And for Thomas, who once feared that the world no longer had space for the wisdom of old hands and long memories, the visit meant something too. In their listening, he felt valued again, needed, alive in a different, deeper way. And as they left into the cool night air, the village didn't feel quite the same. The streets were still misty, still quiet, but something sacred had been passed on, like a torch, from hands weathered by time to hearts just beginning their journey. Number 4, Mr. Bernard's Stories of Devotion. "You see," Mr. Bernard began, his voice low but steady, "intimacy is not what most people assume it to be." He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped gently on his lap, the flickering fire casting soft shadows across his weathered face. Around him, the young listeners sat in a circle, completely still. The room, though small and simple, pulsed with something sacred. An unspoken awareness that what was being shared now was not just information, but something much more valuable. Mr. Bernard was 72, A retired music teacher with kind eyes and a voice that still carried the warmth of someone who had spent a lifetime offering patience. He was known in the village not for preaching, but for listening. And when he did speak, his words had a way of settling into your chest like a quiet truth you hadn't realized you'd been waiting to hear. He paused, then continued, "True intimacy isn't just about the body. It's about being seen. It's about being known so deeply that even the smallest gesture, like making tea just the way she likes it, becomes a form of love. It's about sharing your whole self without fear of being misunderstood." The group leaned in, not wanting to miss a word. Bernard began to tell a story, one not of grand declarations, but of the everyday moments that stitched his life with his late wife, Marianne. "We were married for 41 years, he said, a gentle smile touching the corners of his mouth. "And in all that time, it wasn't the anniversaries or holidays that kept us close. It was the evenings we spent sitting side by side in silence, her head on my shoulder, just breathing the same quiet air. That's what intimacy really is. It's presence. It's consistency. It's knowing that you can be exactly who you are and still be loved." The fire crackled as his voice softened. "There were days," he said, "when I'd come home tired, my back sore from yard work or teaching all day, and yet I'd still kneel beside her while she read, just to rub her feet or kiss her hands. Not because I had to, but because I wanted her to know, without saying a word, that she was cherished, that her well-being mattered to me, that her comfort was a joy, not a duty." He looked at the young men in the room, his gaze steady. "When a man understands that acts like these, yes, even the tender and vulnerable ones, like oral intimacy, are not about obligation, but about devotion, something changes. You begin to see your partner not as someone to impress, but someone to serve through kindness, to worship not with noise, but with care." The room fell into reverent quiet, not a hush of awkwardness, but of awe. These were not the kinds of things they'd heard growing up, not the kinds of conversations you had on street corners or at dinner tables, but suddenly they felt necessary, vital. Mr. Bernard continued, sharing how, even after 40 years, he would still reach for Marianne's hand as they walked to the market. How he made her coffee every morning, not because she asked, but because she once offhandedly mentioned it tasted better when he made it. "It's the small things," he said, "that build a big life. And love, real love, isn't built in a single night. It's built in the morning after an argument, when you still choose to be kind. It's built in the grocery aisle, in the way you listen, in the way you stay." He let the silence speak for a while. Then, as the fire dimmed to glowing embers, he offered one final reflection. "Many people believe intimacy fades with age, that closeness becomes routine or unimportant. But I've learned the opposite is true. As we grow older, as the world gets quieter, we become more capable of seeing the beauty and tenderness. And the touch of someone who knows your story, who has walked with you through grief, through joy, through years, is more sacred than anything youth can offer." The young listeners sat unmoving, their eyes glistening not with tears but with understanding. They hadn't just heard a story, they had witnessed something rare. A glimpse into the kind of connection that doesn't shout but endures. And in that moment, something shifted in them. As they stood to leave, their steps were slower, their hearts quieter. They walked through the village under the pale light of 1,000 stars, each one reflecting a little more deeply on what they had just heard. Not just about love, or about aging, or about intimacy, but about what it means to give yourself to someone, not as a performance, but as a gift. They had come seeking answers, but what they received was far more enduring, a deeper, fuller vision of what love could look like, tender, sacred, and alive at any age. Number 5, a cultural shift in love. Under the soft glow of the moonlight, the group of young villagers made their way back through the quiet streets, their steps slower, more thoughtful than before. The air was cool and still, yet it felt alive, alive with something they couldn't quite name but could certainly feel. What they had just experienced in the homes of Mr. Bernard and Miss Eleanor had gone far beyond a conversation. It had reached deeper than advice. It had touched something inside them that perhaps had long been waiting to be awakened. The stories they had heard that evening didn't just change their understanding of love, they transformed it. For many of them, intimacy had always seemed tied to physical attraction, passion, or fleeting emotions that came and went like weather. But now they began to see love as something rooted. Something that did not bloom overnight, but quietly grew over seasons, fed by care, understanding, and the quiet courage to put someone else's happiness alongside, and sometimes even above, their own. In the weeks that followed, something subtle but unmistakable began to ripple through the village. It wasn't loud, it didn't come with announcements or declarations, but it was there, in how people spoke to one another, how they paused to listen more attentively, or how they offered a gentle touch just because. The young people who had once sought excitement and novelty in relationships now found themselves drawn to something deeper, something more enduring. Even the older couples, those who had been together for decades, began to shift. Not because they hadn't loved each other before, but because the stories shared by their elders had reminded them of what love looked like before life got too busy, before words became fewer and gestures became routine. Take, for example, Mr. and Mrs. Harmon, married for over 40 years. For the longest time, their days had become quiet and predictable. But after hearing Bernard's reflections on small gestures, Mr. Harmon started placing a note by his wife's tea each morning, sometimes a memory, sometimes just a thank you. She never expected it, and yet each note brought tears to her eyes, not because of the words themselves, but because of the care they represented. This was the kind of love that was beginning to take root in the village. A love that didn't demand attention, but invited trust. A love that wasn't measured by how often it was posted or praised, but by how deeply it was lived. Husbands who once believed love had to be shown through grand gestures or expensive gifts began to understand that sometimes the most powerful thing they could offer was their presence, really being there. Wives, too, found themselves softening in the warmth of these small but meaningful changes. It wasn't about being perfect spouses, it was about being willing hearts. What had started as an intimate evening around a fireplace had quietly become a cultural shift, one that reshaped how love was seen, shared, and sustained. Love, once boxed into roles or routines, had become something more sacred, more human. It had become a way of life. And though Bernard and Eleanor never sought recognition, they saw the change. In the way couples held hands again on morning walks, in the way people lingered longer at the dinner table, just to talk, in the way someone whispered, "Thank you," not out of habit, but because they truly meant it. If you're still here, still listening, then perhaps these stories have stirred something in you too. Maybe they've reminded you that even now, no matter your age, love is not behind you. It's still in your hands, still growing, still waiting for those quiet, everyday acts that say, "I see you, I still choose you." If that resonates with you, I'd love for you to comment 3 below. Not just to let me know you're still here, but to say in your own way that you believe in this kind of love too. Number 6, the power of small acts. What touched Mr. Samuel and Ms. Iris the most in their later years was never the grand gestures, the surprise vacations, the diamond necklaces, or the flowery declarations posted for others to see. No, what stayed with them, what made their hearts stir even after decades of life together, were the quiet things, the kind gestures done without fanfare, the soft, "I'll do the dishes tonight," when one of them looked tired, the steady hand that reached out during difficult news, the way they made tea for each other every morning without needing to ask. They had learned with time that love's real weight was not measured in volume, but in consistency, in the way you show up when no one is watching, in the moments when it would be easier not to care, but you choose to anyway. There was a moment Samuel often recalled. He was recovering from a mild stroke, his body slow and uncooperative. One evening, feeling embarrassed as he struggled to button his shirt, Iris walked in, said nothing, and began fastening each button with hands that had known his for over 40 years. She didn't joke, didn't scold, didn't try to make light of the moment. She simply looked him in the eyes and smiled, gently, lovingly. And in that quiet gesture, more was said than words could ever carry. It was in moments like these that they both understood. Love, when it is real, doesn't need a stage. It needs presence and kindness and 100 little choices made every day. Not for praise, but because someone else's comfort has become just as important as your own. In the years that followed, their story quietly influenced those around them. Neighbors began to notice how they spoke to one another, not with flattery but with warmth. The way Samuel still pulled Iris's chair out for her. The way Iris still brushed lint from his collar before they left the house. These were not habits, they were rituals of care. And slowly these quiet acts began to inspire others. Couples who had once been caught in the rush of daily life, work, errands, responsibilities, began to slow down and pay attention. Young husbands began to leave handwritten notes before leaving for work. Wives paused to hold their partner's hand for a moment longer at the end of the day. A small gesture here, a soft word there, and slowly something beautiful took root. The village changed, not through policy or ceremony, but through feeling, through the kind of love that doesn't announce itself, but makes itself known through action. Love became less about proving and more about being, less about performance and more about presence. Mr. Samuel and Ms. Iris never sought to teach, but they did, simply by living with tenderness, even when life was hard, especially when life was hard. And when the younger generation asked them their secret, Iris would often laugh gently and say, "There's no magic. Just remember to love out loud, in quiet ways." As the seasons passed and the village continued to grow, the spirit of their relationship remained. It lived on in the way people looked after one another, in the way love was no longer something saved for anniversaries, but something practiced daily, like watering a plant or lighting a candle. Small things. But over time, small things became the foundation of everything. If there's one lesson to hold on to, it's this. Real love does not need applause. It needs attention. It thrives in the spaces between the big events, and it grows strongest in the hands of those who give without keeping score. So if today you feel like what you're doing is too small to matter, a hug, a kind word, a shared silence, remember this. It may be the very thing that makes someone feel loved in a way they'll never forget. As we close this heartfelt journey, take a quiet moment to let the wisdom settle. What spoke to you most? What simple truth might you carry forward in how you love, listen, or simply show up? If something touched your heart today, write "still listening" in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you'd like to walk with us on more stories like this, feel free to subscribe. We'd love to have you. Until next time, stay kind, stay open. And remember, it's never too late to love more deeply.